Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Open Observability Talks. I'm your host, Horovits, as always, and here at Open Observability Talks, we talk about anything DevOps, observability, and open source. So may the open source be with you. And for those joining the live stream on YouTube or Twitch, feel free to share questions and comments on the chat. It'd be definitely interesting for us on the episode. And with that, let's move on to today's episode. For this year-end retrospective, I invited no other than Charity Majors, definitely an influential voice in observability and a great person to run a fun postmortem on 2024. So, hey, Charity, good morning.
Good morning.
So happy to have you here on the show. And, Open Observability, with observability, you have your brand all over the observability thing. So we're really happy to have you here on the show today. Where are you joining us from?
I'm in San Francisco, at home.
Super cool. And it's maybe the audience doesn't know, we had the privilege of keynoting at Open Source Observability Day just a short while ago, and it was a pretty cool lineup on Open Observability, on observability in general. So this triggered some interesting thought about maybe you can do the end of year postmortem together. So really happy that it worked out, and also probably lots of insight that we can catch from that event as well for the rest of 2024. So actually, let's start with really your item. What caught your eye? The major trends of 2024 from the conference or anything else? What's the biggest thing that you get asked?
Oh my goodness! Whew. I feel like I should have studied for this interview. I think this was an interesting year for a few different things. I think it was the year when OpenTelemetry really caught, folks coming back. We're just last week was reInvent, and a lot of folks were sort of postmorteming it and saying that something like 85-90% of people who came to the booth knew what OTel was this year, and that was not true in years past. I think mobile was really big this year when it came to OTel, embrace open source their SDKs. There's been a lot more participation from the community. I think.
By the way, OTel was my topic for the keynote at Open Source Observability Day. That was exactly this. So I'm joining you on this one. OTel was big this year, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think that a lot of folks OTel, the bigger and more popular something gets, the more it starts to attract its detractors, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's so big and bloated. And, it's now, this was also the year when it overtook Kubernetes as the largest CNCF project in terms of contributors, and which is mind-blowing and amazing. And something that I think I was kind of worth clarifying or pushing back on in a lot of people's minds is this does not mean everybody has to be an OTel expert. A big part of what OTel does is under the hood, it adds structure and definition to your data. There are going to be OTel products out there which you may use where you don't even know you're using OTel. You're just shoveling your data into the hopper the way you always do, but then it gets structured and it gets consistent naming and it gets consistency. And so what that does is, number one, it allows your data to be portable, right? The whole idea behind OTel is that vendors should have to stop competing based on getting you locked into their ecosystem and making it so painful that you'll never move, right? Because fuck that shit. That is so obnoxious, right? Sorry, I don't know if this is the kind of live stream where I can swear or not. But if anything is deserving of swearing, it's vendor lock-in, right? So number one, you don't have to be locked in. Number two, structuring, adding predictability and naming and stuff and conventions to your data means that vendors can do more interesting and complicated things with your data without you having to put in a whole bunch of elbow grease and stuff up front. They can do magic and some auto instrumentation and auto generating boards and auto doing a lot of stuff that you just can't do when you're crafting solutions just both bespoke for every company, one after the other. So I think I hear from my OTel friends that 2024 was how did Austin put it? 2024 is about stabilizing things. There's a lot of adoption. There's a lot of consensus. The project has been really focusing on getting things locked down while addressing pain points. And I think that 2025 is where some of this starts to pay off.
Yeah. No, and by the way, on the one hand, it's stabilizing and everything like that, but on the other hand, there's definitely new territories that are very much experimental. We can mention the going into continuous profiling, which is pretty much new. And I just released a blog post a week before KubeCon, and I was sure it would disappear with all the noise around KubeCon and all the announcements and stuff like that. I released that on the CNCF blog about adding CI/CD observability to OpenTelemetry.
Yes.
I also did the SIG, the Special Interest Group for CI/CD in Hotel, and I just had the folks from CNCF sending me a message a week ago saying that was like the third most watched blog on, or first and the third page on the CNCF.io, and I have no idea how come, because they had all the big announcement with Flatcar and with all the Dapper and everything. But the thing is that for me, it shows that actually the new use cases for OpenTelemetry are really, really intriguing. And I see also with people approaching afterwards and stuff like that. So I actually see it really, really just scratching the surface of what we can do with that in terms of use cases. So stabilizing, the logs, metrics, traces, and all the trivial things, table stakes, but much more to be done in 2025.
Yeah. Definitely. I'm a bit of a bear when it comes to profiling. I think that, which is not to say that profiling doesn't have use cases, but I think that a lot of people who are reaching for it currently are reaching for it because they don't have good normal observability. Like, profiling should be a deep dive tool. It shouldn't be a tool that most people need to use all the time, and teams that are reaching for a lot, typically this means that they don't have a good single source of truth. They don't have good tracing. They don't have, because really you want to be engaged for the most part. I think of there being that sort of like this like fuzzy dividing line between your infrastructure code, which is the code that you have to run in order to run the code that you want to run. You don't typically want to go deep into your infrastructure code. That's why it's infrastructure, right? You're something's very wrong if you need to really understand what's going on in your Nginx code, right? And then above the line is like your code, the code that makes you, the code that you write and ship and engage with and iterate every day. And that's where you should be spending most of your time and your energy and your creativity and your thought cycles, because that moves the business materially forward. And profiling is very much one of those things that goes bloop below the line, right? And if all you have are metrics and logs, then it makes sense that people reach for tracing. But the other thing that I'd like to call out about 2024, and something I'm personally excited in, I've been talking a lot about the idea of observability 1.0 versus 2.0 this year. And the idea is that in observability 1.0, it's kind of defined by the whole 3 pillars. You've got 3 pillars of observability: metrics, logs, and traces, right? Well, that's not really true. That is definitionally true of observability 1.0 tool. And in fact, for every request that enters your system, you probably end up storing it way more than 3 times. You store it in some logging tools, maybe structured, maybe unstructured, some metrics tools, some dashboarding tools, a run tool, an APM tool, a profiling tool, an analytics tool, and like on and on and on, in all these different formats. And a lot of folks this year are talking about unified observability, but what they really just mean is you have a unified bill or maybe a unified view visualization. I think this year, Honeycomb has always kind of talked about the incredible outsized value that you get from having a single source of truth, like a unified structured data, where you store your data once in very wide structured events that describe a unit of work, and you can visualize them over time as a trace. You can derive metrics, you can derive the data you need, but you can derive your SLOs, but it all goes back to that one source of truth, right? It's cheaper, it's more cost effective. As your bill goes up, the value you get out goes up. You have a lot more, levers for controlling costs. I feel like 2024 is the year that it stopped just being Honeycomb talking about this, which is so exciting. I feel like you're starting to see the next generation. I've been so frustrated for years, all these new baby startups popping up and building more tools based on metrics and logs, and I'm just like, what the fuck? There's a better way. And 2024 Q4 is the year that I feel like everybody else figured this out too. So like you're seeing a ton of startups that are a lot like the most common ones are bootstrapping using ClickHouse, right? To store their wide structured events. I just knocked over my coffee and scared my cats. I'll clean it up later. But that's really exciting to me because I do feel like our systems are getting so complicated. And when you're spreading out your telemetry over how many tools and they're connected by what? You. You're the engineer who's sitting in the middle going, well, that shape looks like that shape, so probably they're the same thing. But you can't tell. You can never verify it because you threw away that context at right time, right? And being able to correlate and detect outliers because you have that connective tissue. Like for engineers who have experienced this, you can't pry it out of their hands. Like clicking and screaming. They're like, it's different. I don't know how to understand my code without this anymore. And I think it was really exciting for me to see that go mainstream this year.
But the question is, so you mentioned the storage, which is like unified storage across the different telemetry types, let's call it different, data types. And then there's the element of correlating the different data. So, and this is not necessarily doesn't have to go hand in hand, because you do have, for example, vendors that provide correlation, although they store it multiple times. We can talk about the inefficiency of storing it multiple times and needing to do that.
Well,
some of them even create specialized storage, like storage for, there's a lot of debate about whether we need specialized storage for tracing data, or things like that. Look at Grafana Labs and others that invested in investigating this path as well. So how do you see the distinction between correlation and the unified storage?
How do I see the distinct correlation to unified storage? Well, so, okay, I think I understand what you're asking. I think they're related because you're right. There are a lot of vendors who have put a lot of energy into finding ways to correlate across these pillars, but you have to predefine those join points. You have to be like, okay, this metric is going to correlate to this log, and it's going to correlate to that part in the trace. When I feel like that's part of the thing about Observability 2.0 is unknown unknowns. You don't actually know what future you is going to need to understand. And being able to slice and dice on any dimension, zoom into any, intersection of data, zoom out, is like, it's just, it doesn't compare, and this is one of those things where it's like, we have always kind of struggled to articulate just how massively different and more powerful it feels. But once engineers have seen it, like you can tell the difference. But back to your point about correlation. So I think one of the most interesting things here about correlations is you can detect outliers. Your ability to detect outliers is directly related to the amount of context that you store and the flexibility that you allow. So for example, if you're storing, for every request that enters your system, you store 500 attributes. Your ability to detect outliers is off the charts. We do this thing called bubble up in Honeycomb, where you see any blip or shape or something on your heat map that you want to understand, you draw a little bubble around it, and we go, these things you identified that you care about, here are all the ways it is different from the baseline you don't care about. So this is such a shortcut to debugging really complex problems you've never seen before. You're like, what's this? And it's like, all of these errors are for requests that are coming from this type of mobile device to one of these 3 app IDs that have a payload of over 500 megabytes. And and just it might be half a dozen things that they haven't. So much of debugging boils down to, here's the thing I care about. Why do I care about it? And the thing about building those sort of those bridge points between all of the different data sources that you have is that you have to try and predict in advance what your future you is going to find valuable. And you just can't, right? The more context you preserve, the wider the events, the more relationships you can preserve between your telemetry data. It's a superpower. It supercharges your ability to find those outliers. And I think the other thing that we see a lot of right now is a lot of folks who are like, oof, well, we didn't capture the data in the way that preserves these contexts and relationships, so we're going to guess you an answer using AI. And it's like, that's not better, y'all. That's not, things are not better just because they say AI on them. In fact, if you can compute the answer, you should probably compute the answer because it'll be faster, cheaper, and more accurate, But if you didn't preserve those relationships, then all you can really do is guess with AI. So it's better than nothing, but it's not better.
I'm curious because this is one of the things that I keep on getting asked probably every stage I go and every conference and everything is AI, because everyone thinks that AI is the cure for everything. And also vendors, vendors are also to blame because they give lots of promises, overpromise on AI. But so give me your honest take now that you've seen 2024 and looking into 2025. Is it a real thing or a hype in the context specifically of observability? And do we see real AI helping us today, or expecting to see that like around the corner in 2025?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I've actually been working on a blog post just over the weekend about this. Honeycomb, we were really early we dipped our toe into AI. We were the first, when we launched Query Assistant back in May of 2023, like there was nothing out there on the market like it. And then we kind of put a pause on it for a little bit. We've been sort of waiting to see how things are going to shake out. As a startup, we don't have the luxury of just like spinning up Tiger teams, go experiment. Like everything we do, we have to have a plan for it, right? We have to know it's going to move the needle for us. And we're about to pick it up again. We've got some really interesting and exciting ideas. AI is not magic. There is a lot of stuff you can do with AI that makes the answer worse. And there's a lot of stuff you can do with AI that is pretty much on par with what you could do without AI. But there are some I come from databases, right? So this might be betraying my roots, but like I think about almost like a new type of storage system that can take all of the sort of superpowers of automation and apply them to language and truly unstructured data instead of just structured data and numbers. And that's exciting, right? There's a lot of stuff that, think of how much time we spend on the front end of project trying to massage data into the right way, so that it can get accepted by the APIs and all this stuff. Being able to just kind of...
Yeah, you come from databases. How much time have you invested in ETLs, huh?
Yeah, tell me about it. Being able to just kind of wave our hands and go, okay, computer, you figure it out. I want that data to go there. You figure it out. That's pretty cool. There are a lot of ways to kind of accelerate time to value and accelerate time to insights that we're genuinely excited about. I do think it is unquestionably in a bubble. Kent Quirk, one of the engineers I work with, has this great quote about how it's $1 trillion solution looking for $1 trillion problem. We've found lots of $1 billion problems. We've maybe found some $10 billion problems. Have we found any $1 trillion problems? Not so much. But it's not a fad. It's here to stay. It solves real problems and it's advancing really quickly. And I think we need to kind of hug that change and embrace it. And I come from ops, right? We are not known for being optimists. It's not about if it's going to fail. It's when it's going to fail. Everything fails. It's just like the nature of life. So this is a big change for me. Like this is my optimist hat. I'm like, it's here to stay. It's not a fad. Definitely a bubble, but there's good stuff there.
Good thing we catch you first thing in the morning that you're still optimistic. I have to say, by the way, there are lots of other things. Like I think one of the things that were really much barrier to entry for many was for example, all the DSLs that they need to fail. You needed to know Lucene to query your logs. You need to know your PromQL or InfluxQL to do the metrics and all that. So I think also the fact that you can actually query in natural language, which is something I've been experimenting over a year ago. And that was maybe throwing it to ChatGPT and get me the query. And I would advise the young engineers in our company, start with that, before even opening the textbooks of how to construct, you learn it on the fly. So I think that lots of other little, as you said, it's not a magic answer for everything, but I think it can definitely take off our plates lots of the boilerplate stuff and the stuff that requires lots of technical syntactic things.
Or memorization.
So the transition of the data and the massaging of the data, also building the queries afterwards, maybe even generating sample alerts that you can obviously afterwards tweak and stuff like that. But I think lots of potential around these things.
Yeah, agreed. I do think that like a lot of folks are starting to talk about AI observability, but so there are three ways that I think of where AI and observability really intersect. Number one is writing and training models, right? Just trying to make them faster and give the right answers and all this stuff. Number two is for developers who are writing code using LLMs. Number three is just platform teams, engineering teams who are now trying to grapple with this influx of code of, unknown origin, right? It used to be you could always assume that somebody somewhere understood this code because somebody had to write it. That's just no longer true. You don't know if anyone's ever understood this code. As it's hitting your system, production is where all things become real, right? As my shirt says, you test in prod or live a lie. So I feel like, and honestly, this speaks right back to the origin story of Honeycomb, right? Christine and I, my co-founder and I, met at Parse, which is mobile backend as a service, where we had developers all over the world who were just writing snippets of JavaScript and MongoDB queries and uploading them merrily to the cloud. And we just had to make them work. Like, we had no relationship with these developers. We didn't know anything about them. They didn't know how it was performing. We just had to make it work, right? And this is like the state that I think so many engineering teams are in now. You're just receiving the code. You just gotta make it work and help people understand it and figure out ways to instrument it and stuff that don't presume a deep amount of knowledge and understanding of the code. So that, I think, is a really interesting entry point. The other thing that I think is really interesting is you've got all these startups that are raising just like bushels of cash from investors to make observability for AIs. And what we have found is that you can't have good AI observability unless it starts with a baseline of good software observability. You can't train your models in isolation. It's a big fucking trace, right? You got to all the way from like when the request is generated, it gets handed off to the model, the user inputs, what did the user input, whether good or bad, how do you feedback? That's a trace. Right? And it's all embedded in this really long, string of causation. And a lot of folks who just are like, well, let's get our little microscope out and start looking in the model. They're missing the forest for the trees, right? It takes so much context. It takes so much persistence. It takes being able to visualize this over time, being able to track back and see like where sometimes these are software errors, sometimes they're model errors, sometimes they're user errors, and it's all, talk about needed to like, my brain is failing me, needing to be able to like do correlations and outliers and stuff. You can't, if all you have are these sort of disconnected metrics that are firing off, or if you're using a completely different system to understand your software than your model or your LLMs, you can't do it.
Do you talk about, like, when you talk about these use cases, do you see the data engineers as your customers, or the science side of the house that actually creates the models, or both, or do you distinguish between these two?
Not really. It's all software, more the former than the latter. I mean, we are trying to help software engineers understand their software. I think there are so many opportunities for, one of the most discouraging things of the past year for me has been just how close-lipped AI companies are about talking, not about their secret sauce, but just about applying software engineering principles to non-deterministic systems and how it impacts their own like workflows and code reviews and stuff. It's like they seem to think that this is part of their secret knowledge. And I think that like this is holding the industry back. This should not be secret private knowledge. This is we need to advance together, and there's only so much people are willing to share, and then they're just gonna go really mum. And so like one of our missions for the next year, for the next few months really, is as we start to adopt more AI stuff internally, as we are looking at upskilling people, as we are looking at bringing people along, we really want to put on a steady drumbeat of just like engineers talking to engineers about how to resolve some of these really core contradictions, the ripple effects on their work, what we've learned, what works, what doesn't. And I really feel like it's the right thing to do.
That makes sense. And by the way, I share your feelings about the fact that there is something different, a different vibe when you talk about the AI. And by the way, we see that also specifically on the open source front. It's OpenObservability Talks that talk about the open source, and that's, by the way, is going to be the topic of the next episode next month, the beginning of 2025, about open AI. And I'm going to have the executive director of the OSI talking about the new definition of open source AI that the OSI came up with. And but you see companies coming out with declaring that they have an open source AI. When you look at it, it looks nothing, even without a formal definition. Anyone who knows anything about open source says, no, sorry, folks, this is not open source. I know that you used to work for Facebook, but lots of complaints about Meta releasing their open source AI there and stuff like that. So I'm saying mixing all the terms and open washing things, and on the other hand, the things that really matter and can really move the needle, they keep for themselves close to the chest. I think that's something that we need to mature on this side the same way that we matured on software. So let's hope that 2025 brings this one with, because it's holding us back in so many fronts on this.
I could not agree more. And from a practical standpoint, I don't see the business advantage to holding some of this stuff so close to the chest, right? These are practices. These are, it's like, it feels to me like if the folks who had figured out CI/CD were just like, ooh, this is our competitive advantage. We can't tell the rest of the industry about how shortening time to delivery is, I'm just like, come on, these things, especially these things that once you figure them out, they're so obvious in retrospect. And the difficulty is not coming up with the ideas so much as putting them into practice and doing them well. And that takes iteration. It takes practice. It takes a lot of a rainbow of bright minds, all trying to focus on, the same thing collaboratively and collectively. If they really want AI to be part of every engineer's toolkit, then the best thing they could do for themselves is help us all figure out some really good best practices and what works,
Yeah, it actually reminds me, going back to what we talked about before about OpenTelemetry. So many vendors talk about, AppD, Dynatrace, and all these investing so much money about the agents and doing all the proprietary closed source agents to do all the clever secret sauce, charging tons of money on only the agents. And now that you have OpenTelemetry and that's table stakes and it's open source and they can focus on the backend analytics power, you suddenly start asking, why did we pay so much money all these years to just collect telemetry, just raw data, just get the raw data into a centralized place?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think there are a lot of parallels there. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's funny. But by the way, you mentioned before the platform teams that are struggling with this, and this is another trend that I've seen in 2024. You may call it the rise of platform engineering, in a sense, because we've been talking about platform engineering for a good few years. I have articles from a good few years about that, but it sounds like now finally it starts becoming really mature, production grade, if you will, and you see established practices already in companies. Definitely the bigger size scales. What do you see when you talk to your customers, other members of the community about platform engineering? How does that influence our observability practices?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. For a while there, it really just felt like everyone was renaming their DevOps team and their backend engineering team to platform engineering teams, and it was just this again. When I think about what really matters for platform teams, it's, I talked about that line between your infrastructure code that you have to run and your code. I think that really smart platform teams are the ones that own that boundary, right? And bring a very product focused lens to what has historically been, ops and sort of back-endy things. I think that we're getting more permutation of those concepts throughout the industry, which is really good. A big part of getting out of reactive mode and then starting to build things affirmatively is, having a product mindset when you apply them to, your platform is both a cause and an effect of getting better at that. A lot of teams and I'm a little jealous. I feel like I was my career was a little too early. I never really got to work with great product folks when building things on the back end. And I watch this enviously because I feel like it's such a powerful skill set. And it's really exciting. Yeah, I feel like platform engineering is growing up a little bit this year. I do feel like there's still so many folks out there who are just selling these, what do they call them? IDPs, internal developer platforms. And I'm like, that's not the point. The point is not that you can sell someone to do it for you. The point is that you own that layer, that abstraction layer, right? It's a force multiplier and a force amplifier, and I don't know which is there aren't legit platform products to sell, but I do feel Like every term, it gets co-opted to try and sell people things. When I really feel like the heart of it is just like building software like product engineers do, but for like that sort of point.
I love this definition. By the way, I used to be a product manager in past life, so I definitely relate to that. And actually, part of the work that we do, we're doing these days in the CNCF under the tag App Delivery, the Technical Advisory Group for App Delivery. There's a special working group for platforms, for platform engineering, and we're now running a research on actually we call it platform as a product. We actually we call actually I'm calling on all our listeners out there that have some platform practices inside their company to actually come and share how you do platform, how you define, how do you collect the requirements, how do you prioritize the requirements, how you collect feedback, how can your users, the platform users, can feed in requests for a platform? How do they get support for that? Do you have a portal? Do you have a CLI? Do you have documentation? How do you maintain? Like all these questions to really know. So really a platform, maybe I'll paste it here for the folks who want to listen in. And again, if you want, happy to. Actually, I did an interview this morning, my time, Europe time, for a member that is a consultant who's done that in many companies, interviewing him about how they do that. So I think it's fascinating, and we're just starting to understand how it's done in practice. Everyone knows how they wished for it to be done, right. And I have very, very strong opinions on how I think it should be done. But let's start by understanding how it's actually done in practice. And you'd be surprised in how many organizations they don't have like a proper product owner, and it's spread across different like engineers. And they don't collect feedback systematically. They don't measure systematically and collect metrics on what they release. So
these are new muscles.
But that's what we need to achieve. So I call it.
These are new muscles for a lot of teams. The other thing is that like I feel like an anti-pattern that I see a lot is people are like, okay, we're spinning up a platform engineering team or renaming a team to platform engineering, whatever, and therefore our problems will be solved by this team. And it's like. It's a piece of the puzzle, right? But I actually feel like the rise of platform engineering is very, very much part of, I feel like we're in the sunset of the DevOps era, which is not because DevOps, the philosophy of like collaboration and breaking down silos, all that stuff, like, DevOps is eternal. But like the original idea of DevOps being that like you have ops teams and dev teams and they collaborate, we don't do that anymore, or at least that people are spinning up new engineering orgs and like, all right, let's hire an ops team to run the code and devs to write the code. Like we've all like accepted that it's a really bad idea to expect half your engineers to write the code and the other half to understand and operate it, right? Those things have to coexist in a brain, right? So increasingly, like all you have are engineers who write code and operate and own their code in production. And there are places for specialists all over, right? Like nobody's saying everybody has to understand and do everything. But a really important part of this process is finding some team to own that layer of abstraction between the infrastructure, the commodity. Infrastructure has been commoditized, which is really exciting. And then the code that is your crown jewels, right? The code that makes you, somebody's got to own that interface. And so, but in order for platform engineering teams to do that, to do it well, to do all these things we were just talking about, a lot of other stuff has to happen, right? A lot of other things have to happen in the organization. Software engineers have to feel like it's their job to understand and operate their code. They have to have like on-call rotations that close those loops and make them faster and tighter between people who understand what's happening and the people who are responding, right? You have to dig yourself out of a real hole of operational debt if you're a lot of companies, because the systems are just too noisy for developers to actually get any work done and operate, right? So you have to get to a point where people aren't drowning in alerts and noise and pages. And to kind of like tie this back to observability, like I'm super blind, and I really think of like observability as being like you put on your glasses before you go barreling down the freeway so that you can see what you're doing. I feel like when you front load observability, all the other investments you need to make in your system go faster and easier, and you move with more certainty and more purpose because you can make these course corrections and adjustments. Like the goal should be when you're driving, you're not sitting here thinking about course corrections and you're just driving, right? Because you can do it almost automatically. And the goal of software is to be able to do the same thing, for it not to feel you're constantly reacting and responding and just building, just like interacting with the customer, just creating value, right? And like doing the thing. But in order to do that, you have to have good observability throughout your systems. Everyone needs to understand how to use it. You have to have instrumentation. You have to have, there are all these things. And like, it sounds like a lot, and it is, but I do feel like, whereas there are a lot of investments where you need to toil away and do a lot of shit before you can really reap the payoffs, observability is one of those where I feel like every bit that you make better, it's tangible, like it's palpable, like it pays off. You can speed up, you can tighten your feedback loops, people feel more empowered, people can move with more confidence, users get happier, you can find things before your users do. I really feel like, we're all so busy, we're all drowning in things that we need to do. We have stakeholders, we have, laundry list of things that we need to do. And for most people, front-loading some observability is the best way to accelerate the rest of your roadmap.
And what you said, I think, is also important in terms of the fact that, and this is also what I advise my customers and users who would know, is to do it in baby steps, because every step you make is very tangible. Don't try and, boil the ocean on day one and do the perfect observability that you saw in the latest blog post by charity majors or Google or Uber or whatnot. No, take it baby steps, focus on the critical paths that you have, the critical business flows that you have. So yeah, exactly. And then you can really see that value, and then incrementally add more where you see the pockets of black holes that are really impactful for your system and your business goals.
Yeah, because every bit of progress you make, it earns you credibility, right? It pays off, right? And that buys you more leeway to do more things and bigger things.
Yeah. By the way, one thing that I also found interesting, even when we were at the Open Source Observability, then I looked at the announcements by Victoria Metrics folks now going into logging with Victoria logs, and they're now launching their own DSL for querying logs, and a very similar process like the LogQL for Grafana and others. We do really. The question: do we really need those languages? And for me, it feels like we're diverging from the vision of unified query language and unified observability in that respect. Yeah. So I'm wondering how you see this tendency of finding specialized query languages by different vendors.
I get it, and I also think it's not great. We've held the line against doing this, and I think that we will, because they're a place for query languages, but they're a power tool for power users. And typically, if you need them, you're working around some real limitations in your actual product. I feel like, the core fact of observability 2.0 versus 1.0 is that unified storage versus many sources of truth. But there are so many other things that go along with it. Being able to sort of interactively, like pull on a thread and go, what about this? And what about this? And just like follow the trail of breadcrumbs is, I think, a workflow that that is part of observability 2.0, where you're not just like running a report. You're not just, also the human eye, the ability to visually correlate things is one of the most powerful things. It's one of the most powerful tools. Like there are so many things that you'll never notice in a wall of text that will jump out and just like hit you in the face if you're visualizing it. So like, I get it. You get to a certain amount of data, you get a certain amount of maturity, and people start to clamor for this. But I think that when you look under the hood for the reasons people are using it, they're typically pointing to pretty big weaknesses in the product or the model.
Gotcha. And by the way, it's very interesting, because for me, I've been talking for a good few years. I think I even tried to reach out to the data analytics community to try and bring them together with DevOps. So I posted something on back then it was called Inside Big Data. I think since then they rebranded to Inside AI or something, but it's like designated the newsletter for the data analytics folks. And I asked them, I pitched the idea that observability is a data analytics problem. And I built the full case of showing on the collection, on the enrichment. If you look at the classic data analytics from other domains, that's where we are. And the focus on the raw data that we have, what you call Observability 1.0, which is essentially the raw data, the logs, the metrics, the traces, the profiling, whatnot. This is just the raw data, and we're interested in the insights. We're really interested in understanding what goes on in our system. That's a classic data analytics problem. If you take any data analyst from 10, 20 years ago, they've been doing that on Power BI or Tableau or not, because that's the type of things that they try to extract out of data, regardless of observability and DevOps. So I think we need to start looking at our profession as data analysts in that respect.
They've had this is what everything I'm talking about with Observability 2.0. They've had this for 20 years on the business side. Like this is how they look at the tools that we use for software and like, why are you doing? It's just like, it's very like the cobbler's children have no shoes. Like we have not had, like they've had Can you imagine trying to run a marketing department if you had to predefine the buckets for cohorts in advance and collect those metrics and just be like, well, I'm guessing they're going to be in the... No, you can't. It's insane. People will be like, what are you doing? Columnar stores, which are, I think another really important thing that powers Observability 2.0 tools, because it gives you the ability to slice and dice on any dimension. It gives you the ability to have high cardinality dimensions. It gives you the ability to zoom in and zoom out, raw events and then big picture. Vertica came out like 20 years ago, dude. But like they're doing all these things. They've been doing these things on the data analytics side for years. And we really are just kind of playing catch up when it comes to some of this stuff in a way that's a little bit embarrassing.
Yeah, and by the way, I think much of that is because we've been spending so much time on the data collection, on the agents and getting the telemetry in, whereas now that it's a solved problem thanks to OpenTelemetry and other things, now we can focus on the backend analytics. That's the thing that matters, and that's where you get the differentiation. As vendors, I hope vendors realize that now, but that's how I see that.
Yes, and I feel like another reason that we're still kind of that we've been doing that for so long is because we have this habit of thinking of tech in terms of tech instead of in terms of the business, right? Instead of in terms of business value. And one of the things about Observability 2.0 that's a little bit more subtle, but that I think I really hope takes off is that I feel like when you're using these really wide events, you can pack all this context in, blah, 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 blah. It's starting to merge the lanes of business data and tech data, instead of just being CPU and memory and stuff, and then, app IDs and user IDs and stuff, but being able to have all of the interesting hard questions you need to ask about your systems are some combination of application systems and business use cases, right? Being able to blend that data and ask complex intersecting questions about things like, shopping carts or usage patterns or, these are so powerful. One of my favorite, this is a very long ago Honeycomb anecdote. Intercom was one of our first customers, and they added their high cardinality dimensions to their Honeycomb events, and they're just poking around. They were on the verge of kicking. They had outgrown their database. Their MySQL database had outgrown the largest EC2 instance size. They're gearing up to do this giant ass migration to sharded databases and blah 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 blah. One of their engineers happens to throw some of these IDs in. He's just screwing around, looking around, and suddenly went, "Oh shit! 80% of the application execution time is being used by one app who's paying us $20 a month." So we could either do all that, or we can rate limit this guy. And we're just and it's you can't predict in advance where these insights are going to come from. You have to be able to play with the data, but being able to play with the data and have it all be in one place, it's so powerful.
Yeah, and by the way, it's funny because I had something similar that I even wrote about it something a few years ago. I called it SaaS observability. I talked about actually, even if you're an entrepreneur with your own startup and you're trying to tune now your pricing and the PLG, and you need the metering of your application, right? and to support your self-service and knowing you released a new feature. Does it work? All the fast, fail fast mentality, the frequent releases, all these. How do you do that without observability? And that's essentially observability. And the good entrepreneurs, they sit on these dashboards day in and day out. They start their day and understand, hey, we released this new, probably a few times a day that they release, and they see the impact of each release, from the change of color of a button all the way to a new pricing model. And how would you know otherwise how to do that? So that's like from the product to the manager to the entrepreneur or the head of business unit or whatnot. You need observability, dude. That's like across the board. So I look when I do episodes about product or about FinOps or about, people ask me, but your show is about observability. I tell them observability is not just your IT in production. That observability is everything that you do. That's observability. You need to start with that. That's the zero level requirement you need to start with to be able to do your data.
And this is such a fascinating and important point. I feel like one of the sort of like ripple effect, like there's so many other things I think that are associated with the shift from 1.0 to 2.0. One of them is that I feel like observability still has this reputation of being, it's about how you operate your code, right? It's how you run it. It's how you understand what you've done. It's how you do MTTR and MTTD and when it breaks, how do you get it back up and all this stuff. And it is that, but it's not just that. Like observability 2.0 is more about how you develop your code than just how you operate it, I think, which is that fast feedback loop of, like you said, is this button working? How are these colors doing? How are people engaging with the stuff that I've written? Are they doing it in ways I expected? Are they doing things that I didn't expect? Are those things better? Should I invest in those things? You need this, you need to be kind of in constant conversation with your code, just like understanding the remit of understanding is so much bigger than bugs and outages and downtime. It's like there are so many ways in which you just need to understand the impact of what you've put out into the world in order to really make it, in order to make your users happy, in order to build better products, in order to not waste your time going down rabbit holes, in order to decide what to work on, in order to decide if what you're doing is having the impact that you want it to. There's so much there that is really like observability 2.0, I think, is just like the foundation of all those fast feedback loops that you need to hook up in order to really just run circles around your competition.
Sounds good. And actually, we have an interesting question from the audience, from Daniel here. So I'll just read it out because we also have the podcast listeners. So if you've got zero observability today, would you be starting off with 2.0 resources to be a good idea, or would you still start with your book that came out in 2022, which is essentially Observability 1.0 in that respect?
Although we didn't use the one, it's so funny you ask. We just started working on a revised version of the book. It's gonna, but actually, I think the stuff that we were describing, even the original one, was we were trying to describe 2.0 concepts. Having the having the high cardinality and high dimensionality and stuff. So if you're trying to, I think that the concepts are still, I think we've gotten better at explaining them. I think that we've gotten better at attaching language to them and helping people sort of differentiate. But the concepts haven't really changed because we were trying to lay out the principles and what we eventually called 2.0 there. The first two chapters are a little repetitive. We apologize. We're fixing that in the next one. And we're also trying to add more case studies and stuff that talks about AI and stuff. But the concepts still hold.
So if you just go back to make sure that Daniel got, so if he's now starting on a greenfield, day zero, he has no observability or whatnot, what would be your recommendation now with the learnings that you've gathered today? What would be the good starting point for them?
I'm going to drop a link here in our private chat. Maybe you can drop it in the other one. Start with this blog post that our friend Jeremy Morrell wrote. It's called A Practitioner's Guide to Wide Events. And he basically, this is a guide to how to instrument your code in a way that, and he also, it's a very, he's a Honeycomb user, or he was at his last job, but he also talks about, it's pretty vendor neutral. He talks about open source ways of doing this and other vendor options and stuff. But like it starts with gathering your data in a way that preserves context, right? Preserves these relationships, that says that like when this thing, like the thing about metrics is you discard all the context at right time. So if you've got 2 metrics, you can never again like verify whether or not they actually apply to the same event or not. Like you just can't do it. I wrote a white paper earlier this year called "The Bridge from Observability 1.0 to 2.0 is Logs." Right? I feel like the center of gravity for our telemetry over the next couple of years has got to move away from metrics-backed tools and towards structured logging tools. And then you need to work on emitting fewer log lines and making them wider. The wider your log line, the more context, the more connective tissue that you're preserving. And then, you feed it into a, whether that's ClickHouse or Honeycomb or, something that allows you to slice and dice and stuff. But like, I would start here with the instrumentation stuff, because if you're instrumenting your code the right way and you're using OTel, then you're not locked in, right? You can Honeycomb has a free tier. You can experiment with stuff there. I don't know if ClickHouse has a free tier, but like it starts with gathering up your data the right way, and other decisions you can kind of kick down the line. So that's where I'd start.
Sounds good. Let's see another question from the audience here from Jason. Where do you see observability? Just saw the great article from Pinterest on including observability in their build system. There was the AI conversation, but there are other places you see needed. I haven't seen the Pinterest article, so apologies for that. But maybe you
I
have.
haven't either. I'm like,
I should look it up. Paste it there on the article itself, Jason, if you can. But so the question is, I guess, where are other places you see the need? So I think actually we talked about some of that before when you said that observability is everywhere. Like you see that as a product owner, you see that as an SRE, as a DevOps, as a developer, as a QA engineer. I think also even as a designer, like you now design a certain layout. You want to check if it's the right one. So it's everywhere. But I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to add.
Yeah. So I think another of it, and this might be a little obvious, but I'll say it anyway. The more instrumentation and observability you have around your deploys, the better. Things like feature flags, things like progressive deployment, intersect with observability to be greater than the sum of their parts, right? If you have the ability to do feature flags and like tweak them on and off, awesome. If you have observability, awesome. If you have the ability to like flip a flag for 10% of your users and then slice and dice and group by to see like what is the experience for this set of users like compared to that set of users, or to canary to one node and then promote it to like 10 nodes and like break down by build ID or group by build ID and compare the amount of granular visibility and control that gives you, the whole like, should we deploy on Fridays, thing that like is just one of those perennial questions in tech is like, it's the way that you increase confidence is by giving people visibility and control so that they can do things in these very measured ways, instead of just like, all right, we're going to cross our fingers and dump a week's worth of diffs on the world all at once. That's terrifying. Of course, people are scared to do that, right? Don't do that. But if you're deploying, one engineer's chain set at a time, if you have ways of, like at Honeycomb, we have production, and then we have the dog food cluster, and then we have kibble. So we deploy first to kibble, and then it gets promoted to dog food, and it gets promoted to production, right? That gives us a lot of confidence along the way, because we can, at every step, we can check in and see, is it going, I think that like, it may be obvious, but I think that is still an underinvested in area. And, so much of modern trends are about empowering engineers to own their code and making it not scary, making it easy to do the right thing, hard to do the wrong thing. And observability, a lot of people, there are so many businesses out there that now they're talking about finding bugs before your users do, finding things before your users do. But like, if you're in a 1.0 world, all you have are aggregates and random exemplars, right? That's it. You can look at like the 99th percentile, maybe the 99.9th percentile. You can get random examples, but that is like, you can't actually reliably find problems before your users do unless you have tools that are like scalpels, right? Where you can see, okay, I deployed it to, 1% of my fleet. What happened? For who, when, how, when they did this, for these users with these feature flags on the, on this build ID, being able to slice and dice and like zoom in. And that's what allows you to find things before your users do. Precision tooling.
Love that one. And here, another question that I think is interesting. I'm interested in how you control the cost of observability for services with very high request rates. I'm in the video CDN space. We can have a billion plus events per day, just one node. We take it. Cost, again, a hot topic in observability.
Yeah, absolutely. And for such good reasons. Like I have a blog post I need to write on the levers of cost for observability. But, I do think that like good observability is never cheap. For most folks, their cloud bill is their biggest one. Observability is number 2. And I think that like targeting 10 to 15% is like realistic and can give you good observability. A lot of people are paying a lot more than that. And that's including engineering time too. You can't forget engineering development time. To answer the actual question, at that scale, you only have one answer, and that's sampling. But a lot of people hear this and they get really scared. They're like, it's dropping data. I'm just getting random. And first of all, not all traffic is created equally. Like if you think about it, like think about your load balancer traffic. In distributed systems, a non-trivial percentage of your request traffic are load balancer health checks, right? And a load balancer health check that's returning 200 okay, or a 200 request to your root domain, these are not equally valuable compared to like requests that hitting slash payments, right? Or requests that are, a 50x, right? So there are some like the thing with sampling is you want to have, again, precision tooling. There's head-based sampling where you decide up front, like this is going to slash payments, or this is going to blah blah blah, or this is in one of my tier of users that are paying a lot of money or whatever. So you decide to keep all of their traffic. And then there's tail-based sampling where you actually wait until the entire request is finished to decide whether or not you're going to sample based on that, which is brilliant, because then you can be absolutely sure that all of the 50x's and 40x's and non-standard somethings and things that are timing out, and you can capture 100% of those and then use your knobs to capture a representative slice of the stuff that it seems to be working as normal. It's the like at a certain scale, you can't capture everything about everything. If you're using metrics, you're choosing to discard all the context. If you're using logs, you always have to make decisions about what data to keep and what data not to. Sampling happens to be the one where you get the most bang for your buck if you're using good tools.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I also pasted for the audience guide that I wrote on sampling, which I think that the interesting part in this article is the adaptive sampling policy, the dynamic probability policies where you actually mix and find according to so obviously, as you said, the classic one is obviously errors that are more precious to us than everything's okay to 200s or something like that, depending on the error codes. But so and within these, maybe you want to prioritize based on, you gave the example of that the $20 a month user is probably less important to monitor than the one that is a premium one. So you want to segregate and divide it into buckets.
Having the ability to get sophisticated and precise about sampling is the key to making it a power tool instead of just like a compromise.
Yeah. So I think the best practice today, and not all tools, by the way, today support it easily. So it's something that I think as an industry we need to advance also in the tooling to support it. But being able to build your own sampling policy that really lets you fine grain the cases, and again, not just the errors versus everything's okay. That's a classic example that everyone gives. But I think your business needs, as I said, like the tier of the customer, obviously you want to monitor the premium customers much more.
Only you know your business. There is no one size fits all. Yeah, there's no one size fits all sampling. Yeah, only you know your business. Only you know what really matters. And this should be something that's fairly easy to interact with too, where you're like, this is something let's ratchet this up because we're not sure what's going on here, right? That shouldn't take like a bunch of deploys and a bunch of like difficult, interactions. It should be pretty easy to be like, let's fiddle with this. Let's get more data here.
I really agree with that. So we're about to run out of time. So I want to for you to share where people can follow you. I know that you're very vocal on Twitter, and you're now migrating also, like me, to Blue Sky. But you tell people where they can follow you, because you have good insights to share more than this program.
My blog is at charity.wtf. I am having a crisis of social media. I hate them all. I don't feel like I have any energy for them. So I come and go in spurts. I'm currently running a little bit of an experiment for a couple of weeks. I'm trying to post to both Twitter and Blue Sky and just see like where people are and where people are responding or engaging. But for a long time there, I was on it every day, and whoever thought that we'd miss Twitter circa like 2017? I'm like, this hell site, this trash front. And I'm like, oh man, remember when Twitter was great, So, but I'm nipsy tipsy on both Blue Sky and the other one, X, I guess we call it now. And I'm also on LinkedIn. So, I'm around.
Sounds good. So thank you so much, Charity, for joining me, and I hope that I can get to see you soon in one of the conferences, that we're on the backstage in one of these conferences again.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, and thanks to all our listeners for joining us. By the way, next week.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. We're now finalizing 2024, and next month, opening episode of 2025. We'll have a hot topic of open source AI, as I promised you all. So. And the work to define what the heck is open source AI, and we'll have the executive director of the OSI, the Open Source Initiative, the guardian of the open source definition, Stefano Muffelli. So it's going to be an interesting episode. So look forward to seeing all of you with us. And of course, you can find all the episodes, as always, on all your favorite podcast apps or on YouTube, wherever you get them. And if you do listen to that on the podcast app, do know that we live stream the episode. So if you want to ask questions, like the good questions we had this episode, do follow us on X or Blue Sky to get the live stream dates, and you can join us and ask your questions and share your insights. It's definitely made us a more interesting fireside chat this time. So join us with that. And stay updated on all the channels to see what's happening next. I'm Don Horovits. Have a happy end of 2024, everyone, y'all, and looking forward to seeing you on 2025. Thanks so much, Charity. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.